The title of this presentation is metaPLACE, Prototyping Co-Designed Urban Media for Participatory Placemaking. I'm Associate Professor Ian MacArthur, and I'm talking today on behalf of myself and Associate Professor Fang Xu. We're both from the Faculty of Arts, Architecture and Design at UNSW Sydney. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation was produced on the traditional lands of the Darug and Gundara people and pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future. You'll notice that some of our slides feature Chinese text and some don't. This is because some of the slides have been drawn from previous presentation contexts. metaPLACE is a 3-year study aiming to use participatory urban media to test the effectiveness of Sino-Australian co-designed participatory urban interfaces in helping government and urban planners better understand and design for rapidly urbanizing cities. Using Chongqing as a case study, metaPLACE tests the theoretical assumption that participatory urban media, by which we mean large and small interactive screens, installations, facades, and devices, can act as a co-designed interface between diverse community, industry, and government stakeholders. In assessing how co-designed interactive media can build engagement and dialogue between citizens and other city stakeholders about the places in which they live, work, and play, the research is iteratively exploring how participatory design can promote co-designed placemaking for more livable urban environments. The research has 3 main aims. Firstly, to test the value of co-design as an extension of traditional top-down urban design. Secondly, to examine how co-designed urban media can stimulate a smart participatory approach to placemaking through a series of metaPLACE media installations. And thirdly, to evaluate the impact of participatory co-design in facilitating new collaborative design relationships between China and Australia. However, our fieldwork has been interrupted by COVID-19, and this has led us to focus on using design insights gathered at a co-design workshop we conducted in Chongqing in December 2019 to develop iterations of our public data gathering and visualization prototype. The workshop itself also prompted greater reflection on aim 3 of the research than initially anticipated. Therefore, this presentation reports on this co-design workshop as a key part of the larger research trajectory. So why China and Australia? Both countries share increasing challenges because of rapid urbanization. China's light-speed modernization process has brought many challenges related to city making: congestion, pollution, mobility, livability, affordability, equity and accessibility, and community identity. All these issues demand new collaborative approaches to placemaking. In 2019, infrastructure investment analysts at Morgan Stanley reported that rates of urbanization in China had reached 60%, with projected rates of 70% by 2030. Some report that by this time, 1 in 8 people on Earth will live in a Chinese city. Australia too is highly urbanized. By 2014, Australia was already experiencing rates of urbanization approaching 90%, with 90% of the population living in just 0.22% of the country's land area. This map of the country from 2018 gives you a good indication of the density of urbanization across the continent. Like China, our large cities are experiencing stress as a result of urbanization. In Western Sydney, for example, serious livability problems are emerging due to climate change. In some areas, suburbs are predicted to become too hot to live in within decades. Our outer suburbs and regional towns are facing urban problems not only due to climate change and the pandemic, but urban migration, centralization of services, dying town centres, and residential development that doesn't take into account provision of services and community resources are all impacting urban growth strategies, placing far greater emphasis on the importance of delivering new urban planning, place-based design and placemaking strategies that are tailored to the needs of citizens. As a case study, the Chinese hinterland city of Chongqing's vast urban and rural area provides rich opportunities for investigating how design can help address related livability and placemaking challenges. For many Chinese people, Chongqing is famous, but for Westerners, many actually don't know it exists, despite it being one of the largest and most rapidly urbanizing cities in China and arguably the world. Its municipal population is 32 million people, with around 10 million people living in urban Chongqing city. However, it's a complicated environment. The city's rapid transformation has brought many different kinds of urban problems. Chongqing's reputation as a 3D city has been leveraged by developers, city planners and designers to create intense concentrations of urban media in the downtown hubs of Jiafangbei and Guangyinchao and across the city. The pervasive development of urban media in the city for primarily commercial purposes prompted the research questions. Could Sino-Australian design collaboration, smart urban media, and participatory design generate synergies that leverage the social wisdom of citizens for designing better urban futures through innovative approaches to placemaking? And in a changing global urban paradigm where China's role is more significant than ever, can Australia's Western-centric design profession meet the challenges of collaboration related to China's inherently collective cultural context? Urban media artifacts proliferate across Chongqing in the form of media architecture, urban screens, mediated retail environments, mobile media in taxis, elevators, and public transport, and of course in terms of personal devices, as well as urban media in public spaces in other forms. I'm now going to talk about methods and focus on the co-design workshop that we held at the Dimensions Art Center in Chongqing with a diverse range of urban media stakeholders. Participants included urban planners from Chongqing's local government urban planning bureau, a number of architects, professional artists and cultural workers practicing in Chongqing, artists who are also senior professors and academics at Sichuan Fine Arts Institute, design managers, design technologists, an anthropologist, and design students from a number of universities, including Chongqing Technology and Business University and UNSW Art and Design. The research methodology was underpinned by an adaptation of Google's Design Sprint for a 2-day experimental hackathon-like gathering with the intention of engaging local urban media stakeholders in affinity mapping and rapid paper prototyping to inform the iterative development of a basic urban media prototype interface that we introduced as a provocation at the workshop. Now, these methods were also underpinned by a theoretical framework based in the Manifesto for End-User Development proposed by Fisher, Giacardi, et al. In 2004. And the workshop corresponds to the section of this model within the red outline. However, at the first planning meeting with Dimensions Art Center, they expressed concerns about this approach to the workshop. They felt that the open-ended hackathon framework may not be effective with a diverse local stakeholder group. As we discussed this, it became clearer that even if the workshop was experimental, it still needed to accommodate local social and cultural processes, hierarchies, and expectations. Trust, deference, social context, pre-existing relationships, and face would all play into the amount of commitment participants could or would invest. We collaboratively negotiated a reformulated workshop plan around a more formal, structured approach that would better reflect local expectations about workshops and better accommodate the myriad complex social and professional relational processes at play. To stimulate discussion about what forms of participatory urban media might be possible, appropriate, and beneficial to placemaking and planning in Chongqing, participants were encouraged to access and explore our prototype interface via their smartphones or tablet, using a QR code, or on 2 iPads that we passed around the studio space. This prototype was a bilingual, reskinned iteration of an application for canvassing public opinions and responses to placemaking questions developed by the City Concepts Group and tested in collaboration with local government at Chatswood in Sydney during 2014. The prototype posed 6 questions about the potential of urban media in urban planning, placemaking, and public art. The results were projected as a polar data visualization on a large screen in the workshop space. During day 1 of the workshop, we allocated questions from each set of focus questions to the cohort, who self-organized into 5 small groups. We encouraged taking a protagonist role in interrogating the questions over a period of several hours. The resulting maps, sticky notes, diagrams, and drawings were installed on panels in the workshop space for analysis and discussion. This was followed by an extended session of deep analytical discussion where each group reported back their findings to the cohort. Throughout day 2, small groups collaborated by drawing on the case studies, artifacts, and discussions from day 1. Each was encouraged to produce models as rapid paper prototypes, diagrams, drawings, and text. They were asked to 1. Consider the use of digital screens or other media as a response to their selected focus questions. 2. To engage in artistic and playful exploration of interactivity and experimental formats. And 3. To produce a rapid paper prototype of their ideas. I'll now start focusing on insights that we drew from the workshop. First, placemaking for equitable participation. Urban development commonly focuses on developing the more visible and attractive aspects of the city. Typically, less attention is given to more quotidian, inconspicuous, or forgotten places and the communities who inhabit them. This highlights the potential for placemaking that encourages equitable participation of elderly citizens, the disabled, ethnic minorities, and low-income groups through a more directed and local community approach. Participants felt that while crowds in Chongqing's downtown public spaces are larger and data gathering could be conducted efficiently at scale, strengthening local communities by gathering citizen-derived data that is very targeted could be more beneficial, particularly to vulnerable community groups whose voices are not valued or are otherwise unheard. One group focused on ecology, data, and placemaking. They argued the health of the environment, understood through an ecological lens, should be considered a priority. Participants interested in permaculture felt there are opportunities for using urban media to advance community engagement with greening places, community gardening, and other environmentally friendly activities. While not considered a short-term solution, this prompted questions about creating community engagement with environmental issues, and this led to paper prototyping based on rhizomic configurations of mycelium and explorations of an interface metaphor echoing the relationships between different species of plants in the environment. The kinds of publics that are exposed to this form of urban media were also discussed. participants noted that many who traverse downtown public spaces are tourists and others who may not actually be interested in the specifics of urban development, and their potential responses, attitudes, and observations may not provide useful or precise decision-making data for placemaking. The sheer size of Chongqing's urban public is a pre-existing challenge to management of any innovative decision-making mechanisms related to public resources and generation of genuine value. Public participation with large screens offers just one pathway forward, and local community-based approaches to urban media as a tool for informing placemaking was reiterated. The ubiquity of mobile phones was seen as a way to engage audiences. Participants cited Weixin's capacity for discussion groups of up to 5,000 members. That's WeChat. The penetration of Weixin into everyday life of Chinese people creates an opportunity for discussing micro-topics related to local community placemaking. Data gathering through this familiar mechanism is likely to gather more reliable responses and was seen by participants as having an advantage over large public screens in spaces where audiences are more fluid and possibly less connected to the particular place being investigated. So what do people think about our metaPLACE prototype? In principle, our prototype was seen as having some potential for generating inclusive and participatory placemaking data. However, participants felt management of the questions and topics would need careful consideration. Some noted the Chinese public is more familiar with a top-down, one-way public information process. Therefore, it may not be typical or necessarily easy for citizens to express their feelings or concerns about a place and then have it visualized on a public screen. As presented in the workshop, our prototype requested a yes-no response to a question. Participants felt this is quite incongruent with typical Chinese behaviors because, in the words of one participant, yes or no is not a Chinese choice because when asked any question, we always answer okay. So we've developed alternative question formats based on sliders and multiple choice questions that in a way gamify the experience a little more. The ownership of urban media platforms became an important focus within the workshop, with participants perceiving that the most appropriate owners of urban media processes were urban planners, local government, and universities engaged in research on this topic. Management of the data generated would ideally be the responsibility of those managing the process, with government and researchers having access to the data. It was noted that the agents who own and manage the data must be respectful of the freedom and privacy of citizens. This, however, I think creates an interesting counterpoint to Western concerns about data and privacy. Unsurprisingly, local culture emerged as a significant consideration. Chongqing's identity as the mountain capital, the hot pot capital, the 3D city, and the city of fog were all cited as potential traditional or retro concepts that could have value in developing participatory concepts for placemaking in urban Chongqing. Generational considerations also emerged, with younger participants arguing against assertions by older participants that young people only watch mobile phones. These younger participants countered they do pay attention to large public screens, and if deployed in engaging conceptual ways, young people in Chongqing would engage with participatory placemaking processes. In conclusion, I'd like to briefly reflect on the co-design process, and in particular, design process models like the Manifesto for End-User Development that we'd adopted. As much as this research tests new approaches to participatory placemaking through co-design, it's also about testing post-Western design processes where diverse global design practices are brought to bear. This requires inclusion of voices that are not Eurocentric, Anglo, or Western. The pluriverse that Escobar speaks about is critically dependent upon this. Reflecting on the workshop, my critique of the Manifesto for End-User Development and similar design process models is that although it is overall a sound model for co-designing urban media prototypes, in Chongqing's cultural context, it became apparent the manifesto requires significant augmentation to accurately signify the actual configurations of interactions between all participants, researchers included. It's at these human points the original schematic's apparent depiction of straightforward cooperation is not inclusive environments where complex, often invisible cultural dynamics, hierarchies, traditions, and power relations underpinning interactions between participants and researchers are present. We've augmented the model to expand the process in the red outline to better reflect the actual process, or at least our experience of it. Our experiment started out to see if Sino-Australian co-design could help advance new ideas about our shared urban future by taking advantage of participatory urban media. What we discovered was that a successful pluriversal model of co-design will largely depend upon our mutual willingness to be open to the unfamiliar, to the unlearning what we know or think we know about each other and about design, and relearning how to work together in the moment. If you're interested in seeing the latest iterations of the prototype that is informed by the insights that we gathered at the co-design workshop, please follow this QR code. Thanks for your attention.